Everybody coming out, a lot of young heads I see in the house. You know what I'm saying? I'm Wane COD. Some of you guys might know me from before. Been to Oslo a number of times. Probably sometimes when you guys are probably in babies. To tell you the truth, I was here in '91 with my man Ray, Tommy T. You know what I'm saying? Enough respect to them for helping organize this with Bo. You know what I'm saying? So after this is over, everybody, if you see Bo or Ray, you know, definitely give him a shout out, respect for helping put this together. You know what I'm saying? What you're gonna see here is some slides from my large collection of photos from trading with many writers and also taking pictures on train stations. For me, graffiti was like, you know, when I first saw it, the colors just, you know, got me all excited. I didn't know what it said, who did it, you know, how they do it, but it was like, you know, I was just fascinated with it. So I remember just sitting at my window where I used to live with my mom and just watching trains go by. I was like 7. And as I started going to school, I used to be able to see the trains from there. And just from other kids, their older brothers used to write, and I started learning more about, you know, it was writing and it was graffiti and it was illegal. And from that, my first connection with graffiti was to, I used to take photos. That was my first thing. I knew I wanted to do it, but in the early days, I was intimidated and afraid of all the dangers. Because in New York, back in the days, there was a lot of dangers of being a writer. You know what I mean? It was all the stories from older kids on the block talking about, yeah, you know, if you go to the train yards where people paint the trains, it was dangerous because of the third rail. Or you have many other writers who was called crews, which is a group. And these crews would, it's kind of like territorial, meaning that if you're from a certain neighborhood, they would run the yards or they run the layups where they park the trains because they lived there, and they would get together to make sure that other crews didn't infiltrate their territory, their yard, their layup. So that's another thing that made a lot of people afraid of writing graffiti in the early days. Because you go to the yards to write or do your pieces, and other crews would come and be like, yo, you don't belong here. Take your paint, beat you down. And the thing about these yards and these tunnels and these layups is like, these are places where you're not allowed to go. So once you step into these areas, it's a whole different world. Out there it's like, now it's a different law. It's you against them. So it's other riders you gotta look out for. You gotta look out for police. And police are crooked too. Some police wouldn't even arrest you. They want to beat you up, spray you with spray paint all over you, you know, to intimidate you from doing what you had to do. And most riders in the early days, it wasn't really about a violent thing. They were more on the creative tip. You know what I'm saying? So I'm gonna show you some slides, and I'm gonna go through, you know, each slide has a different story through it. Right here, I chose this. I started off right here with this Graffiti Never Dies, which was a tag that we found in an old Brooklyn tunnel. And it had been there at least, you would say, if not 2 decades. Now, many riders, hundreds of thousands of riders, been through this tunnel, but as you can see, this tag was respected. And why it was respected? Because everybody had a mutual, you know, feeling about this tag. You know, everybody wanted tags on it. You know, and at one point, there was many walls you could go to. You walk around New York City, and they had many tags. Such as Dash went through a whole series of the evolution of tags. Right. I mean, you know, in the early days, most walls that were saturated with tags would be in very low-income places where people call it ghettos. You would see these tags there before tags reached the inner cities and places where, you know, very nice stores and certain very nice areas would be. And even to this day, you can still see old tags from the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. You can still go to a wall such as this and see old tags and new tags. some of the old tags you can hardly really see now. It's been about 3 decades since graffiti's been born. Okay, here's a tag here for Brooklyn Rider, CYTO, which they crew was Top Crew, which was a crew that was very influential in Brooklyn, where a writer who called James Top, he was founder of Top Crew, and he had many writers, and they really bombed the city. Writing is like, there's always hundreds of thousands of writers everywhere, but there's always those few writers in every city and every borough that stand out. And Top Crew was definitely one of the writers, definitely one of the crews that stand inside of a New York subway train in the early 80s. And this is what you would see when you paid your token to get on the train. You go on the train and it'll be saturated with tags. For a writer, we loved it. But for people that went to work and paid taxes, they hated it. You know what I mean? For us, it was like an art gallery. You could go in and pointing at tags every minute. You could tell who had fresh tags, who was from Brooklyn, who was from downtown, you know, who was really making a difference. You know, and this is one of the real reasons why the public really hates graffiti. Because of when they saw this. It wasn't outside of the trains that really made them hate graffiti. It was when they stepped in the trains and had to go to work every day and they had to look at this. Because for them, this looks like shit. For us, it's a whole different story. And if you look here, you got guys writing with very wide markers. And right here, this is Prime 79. And this was a guy from Brooklyn, Queens, who bombed inside the trains, but also did pieces and style pieces on outsides of trains with another writer. His partner was Baby 168. And on the letter line trains, which runs in Brooklyn, Queens, these guys really made a difference, and they disappeared from the scene or the world of graffiti in the mid-'80s. And actually, he just resurfaced. Now he works with computers in a service bureau place. So right now, many writers that wrote years ago are now also doing business and in advertisement design and other things related to art. And over here you see a Kes tag, Kes 1, who's another Brooklyn writer. And at this point, in the early 80s, tags became really stylish, like Dash was saying earlier. This is where it really became, everybody was concentrating on an original signature and really trying to outdo each other. Competition was at its highest. And people call it bubble letters, you know, and then others looked at square, people started calling it simple styles. All block letters. Go to the next. Now over here is a stem, and this looks like a bubble letter type of piece. Now in the early days, early 70s, this is really a piece. Nowadays, people will call this a throw. But for back then, this was a piece. Those days was pioneering days. Those days, no one knew how to do it. So at this point, guys like myself and Dash really respect these guys, because at the time, everything they did was original, you know? And if you look at certain throw-ups today, they come from pieces like these. You know, you can still see the foundation from guys like this who was painting in the early 70s. Now, this is a piece right here by Tracy 168 in the early days. And Tracy's well respected till this day still, and he's well known even around the world. And he's also influenced and passed down his style to many writers who have passed down more style and influenced even people like me and all over the world. Tracy started writing in the early 70s, and he started doing masterpieces like this one. And he had the number 168 because he was from 168th Street. And as we go on, you'll see more Tracy pieces, which become more like pieces we know today. And Tracy also taught and passed down style to another writer called T-Kid, who's called Terrible Kid, which this guy is well known and still painting till today. Now, Tracy's he's probably in his early 40s, and T-Kid's probably in mid 35 years old, I think 35 years old, and these guys all still have kids and stuff, and they still write, you know what I mean? So they'd be on, back in the days, people would only write from 13 to 18, and their career would be over. But as you can see, sometimes when you write graffiti, it never ends for you. You just keep writing. It becomes a part of it. Here's an earlier piece by Worm in the early 70s. And here, this is still a whole concept of what I talked about with the fat cap and the outline around the fat cap. But as you can see, he did a bubble. He outlined it and used the outline color as a bubble. And then he added dots. That's what happened after the masterpiece became traditional. You know, after people started outlining the tags, they got a little bit more playing with it now. You know, he outlined it, he added dots, people used to add stars, you know, and I said back then it's a masterpiece, and Worm was one of the, a very dedicated writer in the early 70s. So, on to the next page. Oh, yeah, no down. All right, here's a Worm piece upside down in the 180th station in the Bronx. Once again, I definitely like to thank Tommy T, Bo, everybody that made this possible, Raid, you know what I'm saying, the whole T Productions. Yeah, so like I was saying, here's the Worm piece at 180th station, which is the main station in the Bronx. And as you can see, even in the early 70s, they were doing 3D, you know? As you can see right here, fill the piece in with a solid color. He's got his outline. He's got his 3D fill right there. And this is right here the foundation for piecing. Even today, people are still doing it traditionally like Worm. So no one can really look at these guys and say, this is shit. And that's why we're here really, because people look at guys from the 70s and go, oh, those guys didn't know it. This stuff was whack.
Also, I know you want to dash the stick figure. You notice there's an earlier form of the stick figure.
Right, the stick figure, which is known from a TV show called The Saint, which was in London with Roger Moore. And a guy by the name of Stay High took the stick figure and threw it up next to his tag everywhere. And that became really famous, and it also became traditional later on with writers from the crew TC5. Now here is a blade piece, with blade hanging off the side of the train. Really excited about how large his piece was. And you can tell that was like the mid-70s because he's got the ill afro and, you know, there's certain things he's wearing, his clothes real tight, you know what I'm saying? And Blade is definitely a writer that has definitely made a real dent in graffiti. You know what I mean? He put in a lot of time. You know, some people said he did hundreds of cards, you know, and even myself, who has taken many photos and seen many large other people's photo collections, keep seeing new blade pieces on subway trains. And also his tag is very original. And this is like an earlier example of his tag. But that's one of the most important things in earlier days. Everybody's signature was really more original. Now, here's an ups piece and also a comet piece. Now, these guys was members of the same crew that Blade started, which is called the Crazy Five. which went on to many different parts, different eras of writers. It was passed down. You know, TC5 is one of the most famous crews in New York City, and still is today. Many writers are still writing, and influenced hundreds of other writers all over. And it was started by Blade, and that's his man Upstairs Comic, which was his partner. If you notice, it's a bullet style. He's got his highlights, he's got his 3D, he's got polka dots in it, and still today people are still doing pieces with fill-ins like that and with polka dots in it 3D. Now here's another piece by Blade, which looks really crazy. Now, you see him, he's got a blue fill-in there, he's got the white outline, he also did his designs in white. And if you look at the tag here, it definitely looks more developed than the earlier tag you saw earlier that he was hanging on the outside of the train. It's flowing better. So as time goes on, people definitely develop their tags as their mind also develops. Now, here's a whole car by Blade again. And as you can see from the earlier Blade pieces, now he's getting really more technical. He's adding his blends, he's adding characters in between his letters. He's got bigger backgrounds.
Kristen, you come here.
And like I said, once you start to do graffiti, you become it's a very addictive thing. It's like anything. If you do it a lot and you really like it, it could become very addictive. And for Blade, you can definitely tell that he was addicted. And at one point, after doing so many pieces, you want to do more. You want to put more colors. You want to add more designs. You want to do more to your background. And this is a perfect example of an earlier whole car, because it's painted from top to bottom, end to end. It's got characters, and you can really see that at this point in his career of graph, he really knows what he's doing, and everything is planned out before he does it.
One second.
Now, this is a piece by Blade again, and it says the Crazy Five. Now, this time Blade went to the yards or lamps, planning to put up his crew. Because after a while, you put up your name, you usually throw your crew up on the side of your piece or inside your piece. Now, this time he said, I'm going to do a whole end-to-end train, and he did the Crazy Five. And if you look here, again, you see
the Blade next.
on this side. And you see his tag here, and you also see his tag there. And you see it's a solid fill-in. He's got his 3D, he's got a background, he's got the stars I talked about before from the earlier days. And this is what went on back then. And for people that saw this pull up to the train station in the early days, this was the best that could ever be done in those days. This was like the best. This was top notch. And you know, like I said before, nowadays many writers come up, they're not really respecting guys like this. But if it wasn't for guys like this, we wouldn't be where we are today, doing it all over the world, and also being sponsored by paint companies, and being really respected by the public. Now, this is one of New York's earlier trains on the BMT lines. This is a J train pulling in at the Marcy Avenue station in Brooklyn. Basically just destroyed with tags on the outsides and throw-ups. And also, at this time, the subway system, they didn't really have much money to really clean trains or clean the stations. So guys would go on the train, and if you could look, even if you took off the tags off the train was filthy. We're going through the dirty tunnels. And that was also one of the reasons why many riders would go over each other. Because after the train went through the tunnel and got all dirty, some people would think, hey, that guy's stuck been running a long time, he ain't even around. But really, that's how crazy it was back then. They didn't even have the budget to clean the train stations or the tunnels. And the train itself was filthy. Forget about the tags. you know, and you can tell it's an old train from the windows and the bottoms. These trains are not really around anymore. We've got newer trains now. Thank God for air conditioning. Now here's a piece from a writer that I really admire. This is a slave piece, window down panel. This is what, at the time, you would say from mid-70s to late 80s. And Slade was definitely one of the first writers of what we call style, you know, or wild style. He went there and he did a wild style piece. And if you look at his S with the 2 arrows pumping out, and his L's with the slices, and over here you see the arrow going through the connection of the letter and coming back out. Now, the fillings and the connections and the way he did this piece, you can still see the influence from many writers all over the world from this basic style here. You can still see people doing similar shines, similar arrows going through and coming back out. You know, the dots, you look here, he stopped it, he put the dots. He's got his highlight. Now, this is when graffiti became more, with letters, more typography, more neater. You know, for this time, this was definitely a real wild style piece. Now, this piece here, I don't know what it says. Chaz, you know what that says?
It's warm too, that's part.
Okay, 1, 2. Right, and part actually, I should have got this. Part actually is one of the writers who was very famous for really doing, he was way ahead of his time actually. Particular styles that he's done, people are still doing. And this piece, you can tell he did a light filling with a dark design. He's got his outline. Only thing he really got is to really put a really dark background around it so it can pop out. But now you're looking at the late 70s where, like I said, people are really doing more style pieces as we know it today. And, you know, he still's got some influence from the old school if you look at the white and the stars. So a lot of the 70s stuff is still showing in the late 70s here.
That piece is probably from like end of 75.
Yeah.
That's more than 20 years old.
More than 20 years old. Here's a New York subway train, a number train, which is like really traditionally known for being gray with the blue stripe. For anybody that really started writing graffiti and really getting influence off of maybe subway art, they know a real New York City subway train to be blue and gray, even though the original color was red or even green, which now they brought it back to the red color. And on it you see a throw and some knick-knack tags there. Now this is another picture of inside of the train just destroyed. And this picture has some tags from people that really bombed a lot of insides and really bombed. Over here we see a Duro tag CIA, who CIA was a very famous crew, started by Dondi, rest in peace. If anybody knows, heard Dondi. He passed away about a year ago from AIDS. And you know, you gotta remember that he's done. He's got a very light filling and just an outline around it. And here you really tell the letter form at this point in the early 80s, or have really developed from the bubble letter or the masterpiece with the tag around it. And but the concept is still the same: a fill-in, an outline. And here's a portrait shot of Min in the early 90s doing an NE draw on a BMT line, probably the F line, as he finishes his throw walking out of the yard, and he threw up his crew, RTW, Rolling Thunder Riders, also very famous in New York City. Here's another Min piece with his partner Kel, and these guys did several whole pars every week on the lines. And the style that they used here is their own style from Rockstar Crew and also RTW. And also they did characters here and also in the middle of the train and probably at the end of the train to enhance the piecing. At this point in writing, after all the piecing, people have started adding on characters. And the characters was to enhance the pieces. And these characters, these cartoon characters, at this point was very underground. Before the artists became famous, these characters was used by writers. The writers, by doing this, these characters are called Zooks and Cheech characters by an artist called Von Bull. And Von Bull was an underground artist struggling in the early 70s and 80s. And many writers loved his work and used it on the subway trains, and later on made him famous. And now his books are being sold all over the world and being bought by writers. So like I said, here's a Min Kel car. Nice. Now here's another Min piece in 1984, on the number trains. At this point in Min's career, he really knows what he's doing. He's using bright, exciting colors. There's a nice contrast of the piece right here. At this point, everything has a place. He threw up a fresh tag right there in his piece. At this time, the word fresh meant the best it could be. Everybody was walking around in the early 80s fresh. Yo, this shit's fresh, you know? So he threw up his crew over there, Rock and RTW, 1984, so people could know the year. Here's a piece by a good friend called Serb. Serb is a writer that came up in the mid-'80s and was influenced by FBA, by Tack, who's a writer that influenced many people worldwide with a style that was done on the Broadway line, on the one line. And these guys, the way they did their letters and colors was with a lot of connections and breaking arrows. In this piece, you don't really see the breaking arrows, but you do see the sharp characters. They always did sharp characters at the end of their pieces. Here's a piece in Christiania, in Denmark, in Copenhagen, by Delta. Many people in Europe probably know Delta. He's one of the earlier writers in Europe. And here's a piece by him in Christiania. Those of you who smoke, you should know where that's at.
When was it from? When was it from?
When?
Yeah.
I think it's 96. I think it was 96. I'm not sure.
Excuse me. If you stand over there talking,
Oh.
would that be?
Yeah, no problem. So here's a character by Serb on the same wall at the beginning of Serb's piece. And the thing about a lot of characters done by writers is it's always an exaggerated face. You always see stress. You always see cans, and you know. This is one of a lot of writers whose first start. Usually they start because of characters like this. Now here's a piece by one of my partners in the early days, a man, Diro, who was taught by Dez and influenced by Duster. And in the early days, a panel piece like this wouldn't be as neat. We did this car in '86, because I had also a piece on the next panel. And at this point, Diro was really ahead of the game. He really knew what he was doing. He had his own style at this point. He learned his style from Dez, and you can see the concept of the D from Dez. Those of you know who Dez is. But Diro, I definitely learned a lot from him. I was a student of Diro, and those were definitely good days when we did those cars.
You also have a bone tag in Mars, that guy's good.
Oh yeah, bone tag. Oh, bone one tag, yeah, no doubt.
Chino
Tag in Brooklyn, many other riders that got up. Now, this piece is really supposed to be shown later, but anyway, I'm going to talk about it. This is a piece by my man Wes, a Sonia piece, and what happens is like writers, they don't only do their names. You know, here he did his mom's name, and he drew a portrait of his mom when she passed away, and for Wes, this really showed how much he loved his mom. So he came out and he did a piece because writing is really was one of his most precious things in his life. And here he really expresses himself, how much he missed her by doing a Sonia piece. And here, as it's filling, you see the filling and they look like roses, you know? This is one of my favorite pieces myself. Here's a piece in Australia, on an Australia train by Casino and another writer in '95. At this point, graffiti has went international and people writing all over the world. In Europe, it's just went out of hand. In Australia, people are writing, and many other parts of the world. And as you can see, they're still following the traditional New York, even though they have their own style. You can still see the structure of the letters, you know, as the earlier days, even though they had more colors. He had this background with little flames. He got a card instead of his A. And those are things that many writers did in the earlier days to enhance their piece. Any questions? All right, I'm gonna ask now. Here's a piece by Scene, who's doing a cycle piece, which was one of his other alias names, at the Subcold Jam in '96 in Copenhagen. Now this is one of the biggest jams in Europe in the decade, in the '90s, because it was a 15-day event, and writers came from all over the world. Me myself was there, and everybody painted on the canvases on these frames. And Scene, who was a very famous writer, and from the late '80s, for doing very, very clean-looking pieces, very concept-looking work, and is loved by many people all over the world because of the Scene name. Was actually found and brought back to Europe after so many years of not being heard of, because he went on with his life and had responsibilities, and many people showed up there to see him. Now here's a New York subway train in the early '90s, and the last New York subway train that was clean was in 1988, and after that, a lot of New York subway trains has been continued to be painted, but the system, what they did was they passed a law saying that if they saw graffiti on a train, they was to immediately pull it out of service and clean the train. At this point, New York City had the budget to buy new trains, as you can see. And these steel trains, stainless steel, was very easy for New York system to clean the trains. So my man Poe, who was a very famous writer in the early '80s, and still writing to the day, was one of the writers that tried to bring graffiti back in the '90s when the system tried to end it. And here he did a big piece so the police wouldn't know who he was. And the only way to get really photos of these pieces is from the writers themselves, because after he done the piece, the minute they saw it, they cleaned it. And here's a P-Found piece by Smith on a freight train. And at this point, in the mid-'80s, as you can see in '95, a lot of people started doing pieces on many different things. They started taking into freights. Freights are cargo-based metal trains which run from different cities to city with all types of supplies. And for many people in not so big cities, these are their subways. You know, if you're in Arizona, or if you're down in Texas, or you're down in another famous place for freights, Cali. That's right, Cali. They don't got trains, Cali. Real subways, that is. So they were forced to paint their names on these ugly metal boxes. Now, as you can see, the graffiti looks just like it would on a subway, but this time, instead of it just being in a city, it would run from city to city, and riders would know, like, P-Funk, that guy is from New York, because of the style, and writers trade photos. At this point, writing is very connected worldwide, So it was easy for riders to connect and say, hey, I saw your freight down here in Cali. And riders can say, hey, I saw that freight down here in Florida months later. So it gives them the same drive as it did when they saw the early graffiti on the New York subway trains. You know, that train rolls in for 5 seconds, and it's like, oh, wow, what's this? You know, and then it pulls out. Well, the freight train never really stops. You know, it just keeps running through the town. So now, when people started doing freights, they started reaching a whole different type, they started influencing a whole different type of people, because a lot of people in the suburbs don't really get to see graffiti, and kids never really get influenced to start writing. But when these guys started hitting freight trains, now when it passes through even the smallest town in the States or even in Europe, people can appreciate it and say, hey, I want to do that. So now we're definitely expanding more again. Now, here's a piece by a writer called Cento. Cento was also one of my fathers in the early days. He's from New York. And this guy, you can talk about him forever. He started writing in the early 80s. He really knows the history of writing. He really paid a lot of dues in the New York subway system, you know, because he was a really small guy. People definitely tried to like beat him down many times, and he stood up to many crews and fought his battles, and also was really known for this style, which he started doing in the early 90s, which I think is also kind of influential because of his travels in Europe. He started, this was one of really the first guys that made it to Europe, if not the first guy. He was in Europe in '89 in Munich, Germany, where he did whole cars with a Europe crew, which was very famous, called Stone Age. And when he started hitting trains in Germany, people began to notice that they're doing very complicated pieces on the subways, because at this time in Germany they were doing very simple pieces, as we know what simple pieces, like kind of bubble letters. And he came with Stone Age crew, started doing whole cars, and the media even noticed it. And from the point of the early 90s, he's been through almost every country in Europe putting his name up. And that was the whole point of it when it first started in New York for this guy, for getting his name up on every line and every neighborhood. Then he got into Europe by the connection of early writers like Neon and Milk, who came to New York in 1988, and he connected with those guys, and later on came to Europe and did many pieces. This is a good friend, Charlie. He's from the West Coast. He's one of the best that ever did it on the West Coast. He also came out to New York in '88. Now, many writers that I've had contact with that are not from New York, who have came out to New York and spent time in New York, have really learned that how it was really done, and really learned the history. You know, sometimes it's not really getting the influence and really biting or really people really teaching you, but it's more of the history. If you know the history, you can definitely make a difference wherever you're originally from. And he wrote many different names, as you can see. Here is one of those, what do you call those yards out there? Yeah, this is they would call it the motor yard or something. In LA, they have these places that are like kind of abandoned, where gangs would kind of hang out, gangbangs. And it was really dangerous. They painted some of them. And they would call them yards. I don't know why. There's no trains there. But anyway, you know, they would go there and they would do their pieces. It wasn't really legal, but the police didn't care because they had more problems to worry about the gangbangs. Now, my man here, Sabal, can tell you more about this piece right here because it's from this neighborhood in the Bronx.
Well, this piece is over by the 6th train, Southern Boulevard, which is in the Bronx. These are actually, it says the Weeder Boys, but it's a place called Wheeler. That was a street in the block where these guys would hang out, and they were basically, you know, they were writers that were in the crew. If you notice, there's some rest in peace to all the guys in the crew that, you know, just didn't make it, you know, along the way, you know, whether it be one way, you know, through the streets that lost or, you know, medical, whatever. And that, you know, obviously you see the marijuana leaf in the east. You know, this is the ghetto, and then this part of town, I mean, their block was infamous for selling weed. And all the guys in the crew, they were the wheeler crew, and the wheeler boys. So this is off the 6th train. I think it's stop before Hunts Point. And you look on the bottom, you see all the guys that are down with the crew. Some of them aren't riders, but you know, a lot of things back then is that there were a lot of guys that went into the trains and layups that could be considered riders because they were just there to watch other guys' backs, you know, and just there with the bats to beat another guy down and make sure, or lookouts, and just were in love for the graffiti and just, you know, wanted to be down and click with the crew.
Okay, here's a muse piece, whole car on a freight train. At this point, riders were doing whole cars like they did on New York subways, but now they put it on freight trains. And this is in '96. Now, here's a hymn piece by myself in 1986 with my man Dero. And we did many home cars on the number 5 line, because at this time, in the earlier days, riders never really bought their paint. They had to rack their paint, which means steal it, because usually you couldn't afford it. You know, your mom never really gave you that much money, so you could be going out buying spray paint to ride on trains. So that day we went racking, and obviously we didn't come off too well. We just got some homes, and you know, we used some scraps from our past piece. And also what's funny about this picture from '96 is that in '84, the New York subway system tried to end graffiti once again, where they painted the trains white, and it was a test. They painted it on the 2s and 5s. They painted it on the 7 line, and what happened was, for a few months, the attempt to end graffiti worked, but Scene and Blade came back with huge tags on every train one night. They went to about several yards and hit every train on each side with these huge tags. And once many riders saw these trains run, everybody came back. It was like a New Year's Eve party. Everybody saw that graffiti was running again, and they came back. And by '96, they painted the trains. In '84, they were clean. By '96, the trains was once saturated by tags and destroyed. Which earlier Dash was saying, the reason why we keep reiterating that the tag is so important is if it wasn't for riders that bombed and do tags and did throw-ups, we'd have never got our opportunity to do pieces. Here's a scene piece between some clouds, a very classical style that he's been using for years. Had the so-called jam in '96 again. Now here's a piece by a few cats down with TFP Neon, and here someone did the same piece. Now Singh is a writer that died in the early '90s. He passed away, and he was loved by many writers all over the world. And anytime writers do pieces, usually they throw him up if they're down with a crew that he's down with, which is TFP, the famous artist, which was started by Case 2, one of Case 2, you know who he is. Technical difficulties. Here's a piece by Wane COD on one of those ugly freight train boxes. As you can see, don't even go into it. Now, like I was talking earlier about how the New York subway system attempted to try to clean the trains in '84, and this is what the trains looked like when they first cleaned it. They painted it white, and most people, plus the media, called them fools. They were calling the MTA system fools for painting the trains white because they called it a white canvas. And for many riders that saw a white car, it was just, for them, it was just an attraction to destroy it. And here's my man Pone, who's very famous for giving many riders style in New York. doing a car in '84 when they first painted the car. As you can see, the car have just been painted white, and you can still see the paint dripping off the car. And there's Home, so eager to get his name up on it. Now, here's a train where we're back in the early 90s now, where the New York subway system has totally got rid of graffiti, except for those few riders that don't really care about the system and don't really care about their lives, and really just plan to do a piece no matter what. Now, this piece is done here by Rio, who's really famous in Germany, and also written like 3 books on graffiti in Germany. Now, Rio, after doing so many pieces in his own town and his own country, have decided to hook up with riders in New York and attempt to do a New York subway train because it's classic. For him, it's like New York meant a lot, and he felt he needed to do a New York subway car to make his collection just that much better. And here's a German train who was done by, of course, TFP. It could have been Rio, it could have been Neon, it could have been any one of those fools. Because out in Germany, the police is very serious about graffiti, and they're very smart. They'll track down your fingerprints from cans. They'll take photos or even imprints from your sneakers in the yards just to try to catch these fools. Now, for me, I think that's absurd, but for German riders, they're changing their name every day. They're changing their name faster than they can think of one. They're doing another one. But here's a piece on an early German train, and like I was saying before Sen had got to Germany, this is what people were doing on the subway trains. Very simple pieces, but very clean. And the designs are repeated really clean. I mean, for most people that would see that, they would think that he would probably have a stencil, you know, for that design right there. But he didn't. At this point, people have all types of caps, and the spray paint in Europe is the pressure is low, and riders have really developed the technique to really do cleaner work. Now here's a note piece by myself, another one of my names in the mid-'80s, and like I was saying before, at this point after '84, this was '86, the subway system was so destroyed, I had to do my piece over one of these kids. We had beef. He did his whole car over my piece, so I came back and I did my piece over his, which means when you have beef, that means you have a problem with another writer, for those that don't know. Now, here's another piece by myself, which is another one of my names, him, and I did it with my man Case, who's an older, from another generation of writing. Case was down with a group called FDA, which is very influential to many writers. His partner was Tag, and at this point, it was 1986, 87, Case hadn't done a piece. His career in graffiti had ended, but he really wanted to do another piece, and somehow I connected with him, and I took him back into the yards, because by then he had lost touch with the world of graffiti, and I was really deep in the game at the time. Here's a piece by Duro, who I showed you a tag earlier. It's a classic bubble letter style with filling blends and designs. And again, as you see from the earlier days, from the 70s, people still doing shines. Duro was also down with Don CIA, rest in peace. Oh yeah, also, if you look here, somebody went over, I can't really read it too well, but you know, once you start getting your name up in New York City on subway trains, you know, it's like anything. When you become popular, people become jealous, or for any reason, they feel they need to, like, you know, bring you down. And they try to bring him down on this car, but it didn't really work, so. Now, here's a writer that really did a lot of work and also had a real original style in New York, and it's Kel, one of Min's partners on the subway system in the early 80s. Before you saw a top to bottom, Min and Kel.
Min did that workshop.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's the last car, right? So actually, this car right here was when Kel really quit, That's right. He quit in '85 and he moved to LA to go to school to study. And men continued to paint his name. Now here's Cento again, and I told you a lot about Cento, of how dedicated this guy was when he was painting New York subway trains, and also doing many trains in Europe. Now this particular style here is a typical bubble letter, which I told you really originated from the masterpiece with the tags, with the outlines around the tags. So basically it's a simple style letter with really nice fill-ins, nice colors, and he did lines to make it look like the piece was moving. So when this car pulled in the station, you could just imagine how blurry it was. But definitely not a respect to scent. It's on a CC car, which is a letter line back in the days. Now, I chose this photo here just to show you an example of what happened when New York City had ended the trains in '88 and they started getting money from who knows where to buy these new trains from Japan that, you know what I'm saying, Americans, they're so fat, you can't even sit on the seats because they're so small, you know. And right here, what happened with these stainless steel trains, like I said before, it's like as soon as the train got graffiti and the system noticed it, they pulled it out of service. And here's two workers, who we call work bums, struggling to get the graffiti off the train. Now here's another writer that really made a difference in the mid-'80s. John One, who really, there's so much to tell you about this guy. Started writing in the early '80s, and some of his partners was like Flight and other guys that were FBA. And John, in the earlier days, he couldn't really do pieces. And what happened was he collaborated with other writers in their cars, and they did outlines, and he helped produce the car. Later on, John found himself really wanting to do other things with graffiti, and what he did is he got influenced by Futura 2000, which is the first car where it was just an abstract whole car with colors all over it and a tag on the end of the car. Now that was the first time a writer ever did that. John got influenced by that guy, and what he used to do, he used to go to the yards and tunnels and bring spray paint and acrylic and just make a whole mess on the train and then throw a tag. And he became very famous for that, and later on moved into Europe where he connected with Bando and the BBC crew, who was one of the first crews in Europe to really influence many people. And later on got into the gallery scene.